Got an interesting question on a call the other day.
Tell me.
The person said, I want to make 10 times as much income as I'm making right now, but I don't want to work anymore than how much I'm working. And the context here is this is a homeschooling mother who is working about 20 hours a week right now on client work and is not willing to put in more time because her focus is otherwise homeschooling her child. And she does reasonably well right now, nothing to sneeze at, but certainly wants to increase her income. And I think 10x meant to be a bit of a big hairy goal. Like I think should be perfectly satisfied with 3 to 5x. But the question was, how do I make more money without necessarily working more or spending more time working? What jumps out to you immediately?
Well, I love this question, and I'll get to what jumps out to me, but I just want to add some framing around this because she asked for a very particular reason, right? She wants to work 20 hours a week and make more money. And what I don't want is for people to tune out because they are working, 60 hours a week and want the same thing. Let's just be clear. What we're talking about is how do you multiply the revenue within the amount of time that you are either already working or that you want to work. Because we also have some folks who are out there chasing their tails, working, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to judge it, but working more than they would like or more than is good for them. And so, yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm glad she brought it up, but let's just be clear that this conversation is for everybody.
It's for anybody who wants to make more money for the time that they're investing into the business. And I hope that's all of you.
Yes. Well, and you asked what jumps out at me. What jumps out at me first is the fact that we have all been conditioned to link those two things so very tightly together. And, it probably started when you scooped ice cream for your first job that you ever had in high school, right? And you were paid X dollars per hour. And, over time, probably that has changed, or that did change. You probably went to a salary position where you were paid X number of dollars for a bunch of hours or, to deliver something. But so tightly we have in our minds the link between time spent and revenue earned. And to me, that's the real thing to look at, because there are we could talk about a lot of tactics, a lot of, ways to go about this, but getting over that initial just internalized feeling that there's a straight line, relationship between how much time you spend and how much money you make. That's the first thing that needs to be addressed or at least, investigated.
Yeah. And perhaps it's worth highlighting here, understandably so, because the vast majority of the human race, their income is tied to their time. And they do make more when they work more, and they do make less when they work less. And so I think you can be excused for having this kind of an expectation, right? I even see it in my kids now who are starting to understand the world and they want things. And I say, get a job, right? in a kinder way than
to the
that
6-year-old,
right?
mostly?
Like they're like, oh, I want this. Okay, cool. I mean, pay for it, right? And I go, well, how do I pay for it? I go, well, there's a couple of ways. You can either get a job, and that's not practical for them, but I'm trying to teach them like what the options are. You can work for somebody. You can do something for money. You can execute on a task and then people will pay you. Or you can sell something. They go, what do you mean I can sell something? Well, you can find something valuable to sell or create something valuable to sell, and then you can sell that and make your money that way. Well, is that a job? Well, no, because that's a business. And, you don't necessarily have to put in the time. If you can create something valuable and you sell it, doesn't really matter how much you work, you can still make money, right? And so you see that even like kids who are just even forming their understanding of the world, even they have a hard time understanding that, let alone a bunch of adults whose parents traded time for money. And the vast majority of your friends, family, acquaintances, peers, colleagues trade time for money. Let's acknowledge that that's okay for you to have that expectation that you are also going to trade time for money. And you probably spent the majority of your professional career trading time for money. But let's also acknowledge that now that you're a business owner, and we're primarily talking here to people that run a consulting business, that you're the owner, the operator, you also have the opportunity to do things radically different. You don't have to tie your income to the amount of time that you work. You can charge for value. You can price your services according to the value that you create, and disconnect the time for money, uncut that rope, so to speak. And that's frankly the big opportunity behind running a business that I think a lot of folks are not capitalizing on, right? Is they just assume that I've got to run it this way and I've got to, sell my services this way and price it this way. But no, it's your business. You can do whatever you want. And this is one such opportunity where you can really innovate and separate yourself from how the vast majority of other people are doing things.
I think it's also important to talk about what this means to the client, because you can really dig into, of course, that's a better option for me, right? As the business owner, right? To not sell my time for money, to instead sell a solution, to, somehow raise the profile of what it is I'm doing. That all sounds great. And I just want to be clear that it's not as self-serving as you might think it sounds either, right? Because if you think about the client that you're working for, did they wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I need to find somebody who can come and do work for me for 12 hours. Or did they say, I need to find somebody who can solve this problem that I have, right? Or provide, deliver this particular end product, whatever it is. They did not very likely wake up and say the first thing. If you're in the kind of business that we're talking about, you are in the business of solving a problem for somebody. And the problem is rarely just built around time. And to be clear, I'm not saying that there's not time or effort required or involved. What I'm saying is that's not the focus. The focus and the thing that your client wants, and what's so lovely is the thing that your client wants aligns with the thing that you want, is they want their problem solved.
And clarity and certainty. Like, you both want the same things in the sense of, yeah, absolutely, problem solved, result achieved, and reasonable clarity and certainty as to what that's going to take. You put yourself in the client's position, and this was not even the intent of this episode, but we might as well go here. Put yourself in the client's position. They got a problem to solve. It's a big problem. And you come along and you say, well, let's use two examples. One consultant comes along and says, yeah, it'll be $200 an hour, and then we'll see. Which, that sounds amateur, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like, ooh, do I sound like that? Yes, you do. You can make it sound more polished, but it's as amateur as that sounds. Yeah, it'll be a couple $100, and then we'll see what happens. I don't know. Right? Or the other consultant comes along and says, well, yeah, it's going to be 20 grand. Here's what we'll do. A, B, C, D, E, F. Here's the scope. Here's the process. Here's the sequence. Here's the timing. Here's some of the risks we need to be aware of. Here's where it could go off the rails. Here's how we'll bring it back if it does. And in the end, to get you to your destination, 20 grand. Many clients, the clients you want, frankly, the clients you want are going to pick the consultant at 20 grand or whatever the number is, because that person's actually taken ownership over projecting what's going to be required and provided the client with a level of clarity and certainty as to what it's going to take for them to solve the problem. Whereas the former has basically said, I don't know what it's going to take. And so I'm just going to essentially defer the risk to you, Mr. Client. Now you're going to pay me however much you need to pay me based on how long it takes me to do the work. Sucks to be you.
Now, I can imagine someone listening to you say that and thinking, well, wait a minute, hold on. Now I have all the risk. And it's also worth talking about the fact that that is not necessarily true in this context either, right? What we're talking about is you taking on, yes, the risk to some degree because you are the expert. And, to be frank, that's part of what you're bringing to the table is you have the expertise. You're the person who has the confidence that the problem can be solved, but recognize that you can also mitigate for that risk. So, if there's something the client needs to do in order for this to happen, if there's something that they need to provide to you, you can build that in to what your formalized contract looks like. So this isn't a case of saying, you just need to give a number and then no matter what happens, you're on the hook. But what we are saying is what the client needs and wants is for their problem to be solved. And they need to know how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. And if you can tell them that, you have already given them such a sense of, calm and everything's going to be okay, that you've put yourself and them in considerably better position than they were before you met.
Now, I want to take you through the very real case study of this particular prospect or client that I was talking to, because I think where we got to is interesting. And I believe the starting point was she was making currently, let's say, 150, 200 grand a year, or something like that, give or take. Okay. And where we got to was the actual income potential is more like 7 figures for the same amount of time invested. And here's how we got there. Step one was, okay, well, are there certain things that you do that are more profitable than others? Like, what's the margin on your current services? What's the margin on your current offers? Are they all the same? Well, no, they're not all the same. Okay, so what's the most profitable? What's the most profitable single thing that you do? We identified that service area. Okay, and then the question became, well, what happens if all you did was sell that one thing? That's your exclusive focus. All of your time, and there were some subcontractors involved here, all of your time and the subcontractor's time goes into delivering and selling that one thing. Well, I think that got us to, give or take, when we ran the math on it, that got us to maybe $400,000 or $500,000. Okay. But that's at your current price point. What happens if the price point goes up? So how does the price point go up? Well, it goes up because you have excess demand for your services. Demand exceeds supply, and Economics 101 will tell you that when demand exceeds supply, the price goes up. So when you have excess demand and you can't fulfill on projects anymore, the only reasonable thing to do, well, there's a couple of reasonable things to do. One is you can increase your price point. 2 is you can increase your capacity by hiring more subcontractors. And ultimately, both can be done, probably in sequence, though, not at the same time. And so when we ran the math on it, just the simple exercise of let's focus in on the most profitable service, and the 80-20 rule applies here, right? This was like 20% of her time was going towards this service that was far more profitable than anything else she was doing. And if we exclusively sell that and get to a point where we have not enough time to do it and we have excess demand, and then we raise the price, we literally went on paper, mind you, from a couple $100 grand a year to $1 million a year from those very few simple tweaks.
There's also something really important to talk about here, I think, around constraints, because there's a dangerous thought pattern that you can get into when you don't have them. So in this particular case, this person has a very specific constraint, right? For very specific reasons. And having that constraint is forcing this thinking, right? That constraint created this question. If she was in a headspace where she could say, you know what, I can work 3 times as many hours in a week, then she would work 3 times as many hours, same, kind of revenue per hour, if we want to call it that, and not actually get to the place where she's thinking about her business differently. And I would suggest to anyone out there who's listening, figure out what your constraints are first and then optimize within them. We often do it backwards, right? We just try to create more, and then try to find a way to pull it back, right? To contract, to make it more palatable. But this is really about figuring out what your constraints are and ideally choosing them for yourself, right? As opposed to having them forced upon you by, bumping up against other, responsibilities or creating problems in your life. Figure out what that constraint looks like. Free yourself of the limitations that you quite possibly have around the kind of revenue you can make within that time frame. And then think about exactly, Ahmed, as you just said, like, what is the process to get there? Because quite frankly, there always is one.
And I feel like the two constraints that enabled the increase in income in this example are relatable to everybody. Everybody has, I don't care who you are, everybody has a fixed supply, right? A fixed capacity, a fixed number of hours that you're willing to work. Even our new client, Carrie, who's a high profile lawyer and does very well and is content to work 80 hours a week. You'll meet her soon enough, right? Like, even she has an upper limit and it's 80 hours. And I think she's cut from a different cloth than most people who are probably in the 40 to 50 range, but everybody's got a limit.
Yeah.
I'm only willing to work this much. Let's start with that, right? Figure out what your limit is. Okay. Once you have your limit in mind, and the question is, how can I maximize my income without working more than this? I think the second question, and what really unlocked the thinking here for this particular person, was, what's the most profitable thing I can do? Because once we acknowledge that we have a fixed amount of time, then the question becomes, how do we make the best use of that time? How can we make that time highly leveraged? What is the most productive? And I like the word profitable better. What's the most profitable thing I can do? So identify what is the one particular service area, solution, or market. It could be either or and both, right? It could be that you choose a particular service line that enables higher pricing, and that's probably a whole other conversation. And or you choose a market that can bear higher pricing. That's a whole other conversation too, but both are options. Choose that focus where you have this mix of product and market that enables the highest price point. And now what you have left with you is this question around, okay, how can I fill up all my time doing that one thing? And once I've done that, how can I then create excess demand? So I have a waiting list of people that want to do that thing with me that I can no longer serve, so I can raise my price point. Once you have that clarity in questions 1 and 2, how much time do you want to work and what's the most profitable use of your time? Inevitably, the task ahead is going to be creating sufficient demand to exceed supply. And that's when things get really interesting.